Well, good evening. Welcome to Gonzaga University, and welcome to our Spring 2023 Next Generation Medicine Lecture featuring Dr. Chris Damman from the University of Washington. And thankfully, welcome back in person to these events. It's exciting to see everybody. My name is John Skloot. I serve as Senior Advisor to Gonzaga University President Thane McCullough. I also have the privilege of serving as Executive Director of the University of Washington Gonzaga University Health Partnership. As a nation, we face unprecedented challenges in providing access to affordable, quality health care for everyone. And those challenges are exacerbated in our rural communities, which, as we know, make up a large part of Eastern Washington. As a partnership, we believe that finding solutions requires breaking down traditional barriers, developing comprehensive, sustainable, and equitable solutions. That was the genesis for and the continued mission of our health partnership. Our combined strengths, deep community roots, world-class health and medical education, and the synergy created through a vast network of students, faculty, clinicians, and partners creates an impact that's greater than either institution could achieve alone. The lecture tonight serves as a great example of the collaboration and our commitment to a healthy community. Our Next Generation lecture series is presented to the Spokane region 3 times a year and typically features some of the University of Washington School of Medicine's highly respected educators and researchers to share their discoveries and insights about really important public health issues. Now I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Daryl Podick, who will say a few words and introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks, John. He's taller than I am. First of all, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all of you for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful night outside, and coming inside a night like this is tough, but appreciate it. It's going to be a great talk, and just really appreciate you coming. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Daryl Podick. I'm the Associate Dean for the University of Washington School of Medicine here in Spokane, and the Chief of Medical Education for our Regional Health Partnership. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors for the night. In addition to the University of Washington School of Medicine and Gonzaga University, we want to give a big shout out to Providence, to Multicare, Spokane Regional Health District, Spokane County Medical Society, and the UW Population Health Initiative. What we're hoping to do is have Dr. Damman come up and talk to us about gut health for the next 50 minutes or so. Followed by that, we'll have a Q&A session, and hopefully you'll save up all your great questions for Dr. Damman. We're very pleased to have Dr. Damman with us tonight. He's from the University of Washington. He's a board-certified gastroenterologist and is an associate professor of medicine in the Department of Gastroenterology and Medicine. He's an expert in the role of endogenous gastrointestinal organisms and in the health and disease, and is often featured in the media regarding the gut microbiome. He's recently contributed to the Washington Post article about how probiotic supplements may not be doing what they think we're doing. And of particular interest of Dr. Damman's is the microbiome, functional foods, and he explores these themes on his blog, which is called Gut Bites MD. Dr. Damman received his medical degree from Columbia, and he pursued the rest of his education and postgraduate work at the University of Washington, his internal medicine residency, a teaching appointment in cardiology, and then a fellowship in gastroenterology, and he stayed on as faculty. Please join me in giving a nice warm welcome to Dr. Chris Damman.
Well, what an honor and a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the warm welcome, literally and figuratively. Thank you all for coming out, especially on a very nice day. I always enjoy coming to Spokane. I have family here, and it's great to be back. I had a wonderful run, enjoyed downtown, and it's now just a pleasure to be with you today. So I'm going to talk to you today about next generation nutrition. Now, is that a bit of an oxymoron? It's not lost on me that this is a next generation lecture, and yet we're talking about nutrition, which is really age-old. It's the oldest medicine we have. And what a strange thing that our modern medical establishment is coming around now finally to this idea that food truly is medicine. It's a wonderful thing. It's a thing that's happening at the highest levels, even within government, the White House, in recent meetings. And it's just a pleasure to be part of that movement, which I am very passionate about and feel like really has a big opportunity to improve health. So first, just disclosures. I do consult for BC Biosciences and for Supergut. And I like to start simple. Calories in, calories out. It is, after all, how things work, right? Nutrition. I'm a gastroenterologist, and you'll see, not by chance, I have our body depicted as a simple tube with a mouth and the other end. Okay. Well, it does get a little bit more complicated, and we'll dive into those weeds tonight. But coming out the other end of this lecture, I do hope that there's some clarity as well, and that things seem a little bit simpler at the end of it all. In the course of this lecture, I do hope to talk about, first, a quick intro to metabolic disease and context, and then diving deep into nutrition and fiber, touching a bit on probiotics, and then ultimately talking about some next-generation technologies and nutrition. All right, some more tubes. Geez. So you'll see two tubes here. One's a small tube, a thin tube, an underdeveloped, undernourished, stunted tube, and the other is a large tube, obese, perhaps with metabolic disease. And this is the state of our world. This is the double burden of malnutrition that exists here in the US, truly, but also in parts of the world that I was working in at the Gates Foundation in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And what became truly disheartening is the malnutrition that we were treating, the undernutrition, was developing into overnutrition. Our problems were being replicated in other parts of the world. And it was a wake-up call that this is something that needs to be short-circuited and could be short-circuited right here at home. And so with that sort of insight, it was that I came back to the US and focused on overnutrition, metabolic disease, obesity, and diabetes. I start big, start with the broadest perspective, and nutrition is truly it's a very complex problem, and it's a problem that exists not just at the level of biology, but at the level of policy. And I've represented here 4 of the major institutions that are involved both in the problem and can be involved in the solution. And you'll see government, you'll see business, you'll see academia, and you'll see, very importantly, people. At the very bedrock of society is knowledge. Knowledge has the power to transform. And it's by design that bedrock is there right at the bottom of these pillars. You also see 2 other layers, the resources and the policy. And these are really just means to an end. If we keep our focus on what's most important, that is the people that we're trying to impact, whether it's constituents, consumers, patients, or individuals. If we keep our eye on that most important thing as a guiding light, everything else can fall into place. So knowledge, what do we know about this problem? We know it's a big one. We know it's one that's increasing, despite all of our efforts. 73% are overweight or obese in this nation. I'll just pause for a minute because I think it's easy for that to go in one ear and out the other. But that's 3 in 4 people, right? Looking around an average room, that's 3 in 4 people that you see. This is a huge, huge problem. Diabetes isn't any different, and the numbers associated with it in terms of dollars is staggering. It's a problem that's increasing in prevalence as well. And it's a problem that hasn't always existed. That's the interesting thing. And truly there was an inflection point, maybe back in the 70s or so, where the incidence really started increasing in obesity, diabetes, and diet-related diseases. Why is that? If we can answer that question, maybe we can come up with a solution. Well, is it that our diets have changed? Ultra-processed foods, maybe the way we eat foods, the snacking, drinks, coffees, lattes, sugar-sweetened beverages? Is it that we're just not as active anymore? Take cars everywhere, spend a lot of time on screens, don't get outdoors? Is it that our microbiomes are depleted? Possibly. Or is it that we're stressed, not sleeping as well, maybe snacking more as a result? Stress hormones up, metabolic derangement as a result. Well, the answer is yes. It's all the above, truly. And in the interest of simplifying things, we can think of them as the 4 M's: molecules, microbes, movement, and mind. And for each of these, what I call pillars of disease, there are 2 sides to the coin. For molecules, there's healthy food, unhealthy food, and toxins. For microbes, there's microbiome, and there's pathogens. For movement, there's activity and being a couch potato. And lastly, for mind, there's getting good sleep and mindfulness, maybe even meditation, listen to music, and being stressed and not sleeping well. These all truly contribute in ways that we've identified pathophysiologically to obesity and diabetes and metabolic disease. Well, there's one thing that's the most important thing of all. It's another bedrock, a foundation, that's community. After all, what is a life worth living if not for the people that we love? That was a Freudian slip. Our friends and our family. This is what gives us a reason. It's also what gives us resilience if we get sick. Now, in the interest of identifying the levers that can disproportionately move the needle in the problem, I might put my finger down on the molecule piece, on the food. It's not to say the others aren't incredibly important, but we have to pick our battles. We have to choose where we're going to put our resources. And if I had to choose one thing, I might say it's the food. And we know a lot about food. This has been researched. We know the answers. We know metabolic disease is improved with the Mediterranean diet. And this has been shown in tens, dozens, maybe even hundreds of studies, not just associations, but interventional studies too. We know the answer. We also more recently have learned that ultra-processed foods, the foods that come in shiny packages, the foods that you find in the center of the aisle of a grocery store, these are associated with metabolic disease, obesity and diabetes. Here's some of the data. The first plot is a plot of prevalence of obesity versus household relative availability of processed foods across different nations. And you'll see as the availability of those foods increases, the prevalence of obesity increases as well. Now, US you won't see on here, but it's up towards the top in the upper right. Likewise, all-cause mortality increases as the consumption of ultra-processed foods increase, and diabetes as well. All right, that's epidemiology, that's association. We all know association is not causation. There's could be plenty of confounders there. So this is one of the first studies that actually looked at an intervention of ultra-processed foods relative to minimally processed foods. There's a study done out of the NIH by Kevin Hall and his team. And it's a really interesting study. It's called a diet crossover design. And the subjects were actually indentured servants, so to speak, for the duration of the study. They actually lived in the facility, so it's as controlled a study as you can get. And one cohort started with the ultra-processed foods. Another cohort started with the minimally processed foods, and then they switched over. And what they found was super interesting. The folks, when they were eating the ultra-processed foods, ate more calories, which you'll see right here in energy intake. And the folks that ate the minimally processed foods ate less. But even more, they gained weight. And that weight was a result of fat-free weight gain, and correlated with sodium, correlated with a number of different gut hormones like GLP-1, GIP. These are the same hormones, incidentally, that are being used for treating overweight that you've seen in the media recently, Wegovy and similar medications. The reason these are so powerful is they're tapping in these fundamental mechanisms that exist within the gut. But there's natural ways of invoking those mechanisms as well, and natural ways that are lost on our guts because many of the things that stimulate those mechanisms are removed from food and processing. All right, so I've been throwing around this term, ultra-processed food. What does it mean? Well, this is a distinction, a definition that came out of a group in South America called the NOVA classification. There's 4 different classes, and ultra-processed foods are the bottom of that class. What defines ultra-processed foods are that they are essentially all the nutrients extracted from whole foods and then put back together again. And they can be chemically extracted, they can be modified, and then reassembled. Okay, well, that's all fine and good, but what does that really mean? Can we more precisely define what an ultra-processed food is? And there's a lot of debate around this right now within nutrition communities and a lot of theories. Well, one of those theories has been around for a bit, and that's, is it just the things that are concentrated or added that make them bad? And that's sugar and salt and fat. And I think there's even a book by that name. Maybe. What about this term hyperpalatability? What does that mean? That's when you start thinking about sugar and fat and salt in various combinations and how that actually increases our urge to eat those things, taps into a desire to consume more. So they're too easily consumed. There's also this idea of disrupted matrix. So maybe the food that we're supposed to be eating should have intact cells, intact tissues. And if it's all broken up, maybe it's just too easily absorbed by our body, and maybe not in the right ratios, not in the right balance. And then lastly, we've talked so much about the things that we add or concentrate that are bad, but we're coming around to this idea, maybe it's the things that we're taking out as well that are just as important. And it's the balance between those things that's truly what will achieve a healthier approach to food. All right, so this is a depiction of the processing. You can see a whole grain here. It's just a generic whole grain. You could put in a rice grain, you could put in a wheat grain, corn. And essentially what happens when it's refined, you remove the bran and the germ, and that removes a lot of the good things like a lot of the fiber, a lot of the good fats, a lot of the vitamins, and also the polyphenols, the things that give foods their color. Then we add insult to injury and we mill it. We turn it into this fine little powder, and all of the starch that's in there, normally our body has to work really hard to get at that starch, but when it's a powder, it's almost like a nutritional bomb goes off in our gut. It's just so easy to get at that nutrients and so easy to get absorbed. And then lastly, it's the extraction and the treating that happens, the bleaching of the flour. So here's a thought. What if we just ate whole foods? Okay, great. Well, we've been saying that for a long time, but it's really hard. Here's another thought. Let's eat whole foods. Okay, great. Let's keep at that message. But maybe there's, as a pragmatist, an approach where we think about how we process foods and we can incrementally make them better. Maybe the 70-30 rule applies here. We could add these things back in. There's value to processing in terms of shelf life, cost of goods. They're also super easy to prepare, consume. So can we have our cake and eat it too? I don't know. And this sort of speaks to that continuum where on the one side you have the whole food, Yes, number 1, 2, 3 could go on, Whole Foods. But we've been saying that for the last several decades, and our nation, our world is still moving in the direction of obesity and diabetes. What if we took a pragmatist approach and we said, okay, let's do whole foods, but let's also see how we can make those processed foods better. Let's put in some of those things that have been taken out back in, the fibers, the polyphenols, etc. All right, well, everyone loves a good Grecian quote, and this is the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, said it almost 2,500 years ago. Let food be thy medicine. Go figure. Well, this is the modernist revision on that. Just as they're the 4 M's, I've got the 4 F's, the fibers, the phenols, the ferments, and the good fats. And okay, one of those is a cheat because it's a phonetic F, it's a PH. But bear with me. You can see all these beautiful whole foods. We should eat those. And in terms of which lever do I think is going to move the needle the most, similar to the 4 M's and putting the finger down on molecules or food, which of these do I think can move the needle more than any? And I would say maybe it's the fibers. And I'll show you some of the evidence and data to support that. All right, so here's some epidemiological data. Again, we know that correlation is not causation, but it's something. And it shows us in the Framingham cohort that as fiber decreases and carbohydrates increase in that ratio, you see a higher risk of waist circumference being larger. In other words, obesity. It's one of the measures in addition to weight that we have. And similarly, diabetes increases with that ratio. Within diabetes specifically, there is an increased all-cause mortality associated with lower consumption of fiber, and also an increased risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. All right, now that was epidemiological data, that was correlation. This data is actually more causative. These are interventional studies. It's a meta-analysis looking at 45 different randomized placebo-controlled trials, which are the gold standard, and showing that almost categorically, all of the different measures of metabolic health that we have, hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of diabetes, fasting glucose, HDL, LDL, which is our cholesterol, BMI, which is weight, systolic blood pressure, and diastolic blood pressure. These are all moving in the right direction. You'll notice only one moves to the right, and it should be moving to the right. That's actually the direction of health for HDL. The others are moving to the left because they should be going down. And this was an assemblage of many different papers, many different fibers, and you can see a list of the fancy names up there. Okay, so I showed you some association data. I've showed you some interventional data with fibers specifically. So it's not just high fiber diets, but it's actually those fibers that are critical for metabolic impact. But how is it working? I'm a GI doc, and I'm super happy to be able to show you a GI slide with the stomach, small intestine, large intestine. And there's kind of 2 major areas where those fibers are working. There's the upper gut and the lower gut. And the mechanisms work in concert and synergy with each other. Now, the upper gut mechanism, some of the fibers that we eat create this gel. Just think of Metamucil when you put it into a glass of water. It gets super thick. Well, that happens in our stomachs too, even with plant fibers, not isolated fibers. And that actually slows the absorption of sugar and slows the breakdown of nutrients in our small intestine. There's even some lock and key mechanisms where it slows down the absorption through the key transporters. So it's not just a viscosity or diffusion mechanism, but working with the actual receptors and the transporters that take up sugar and other nutrients. So that's the upper gut mechanism. It happens right away. There's another mechanism, and that's once those fibers, which don't get digested by our own enzymes, that's the definition of a fiber. It's a carbohydrate that just can't be digested. Once they make their way down into the lower intestine, the last part of the small intestine and the colon, that's where all the microbes, the microbiome, have their feast. It's like leftovers for them, or a doggy bag. And they create lots of wonderful things that are really important for our health. And we've been starving them. One might say they're even a little bit hangry at us. This is just another depiction how the fiber doesn't get digested in the upper gut, does get digested not by our enzymes, but by the microbes in our lower gut. And then all of these different metabolites, these bioactive substances are made. They're really important for our health. Highlighted one, which is butyrate. Butyrate is one of the star molecules that the microbiome makes. And then you'll see it stimulates GLP-1. We heard about that. That's Wegovy. GLP-1 then has wonderful effects in the body. And you'll see lines going to just about every organ you can imagine, right? So it goes to the heart, it goes to the brain and controls our appetite, goes to the liver and controls how much sugar is released by the liver from glycogen, goes to the pancreas and controls how much insulin and glucagon are released, goes to fat cells and controls how much sugar is taken up and converted to fat, and goes to muscle cells and controls how much sugar is taken up by muscles and metabolized to make us move. So what does all this mean in the end? Well, you'll see here a curve, the first meal. That's that first mechanism. That's what happens in the upper gut. The viscosity, the slow absorption I was talking about, that's immediate. And you'll see two different meals here. One is a high fiber meal and one is a low fiber meal. What's super interesting is what happens with that next meal. So imagine this is breakfast. All right, that's lunch. Now, in this experiment, the two different groups ate the exact same thing for lunch. Their breakfasts were different. One had high fiber, one had low fiber. But their lunch was the same. And yet, there's a second meal effect, where the group that had the high fiber actually has a lower spike in the blood glucose. That's a good thing. When your blood glucose spikes less, your insulin goes up less, and that whole cascade of events as a result of insulin going up is less as well. You're less predisposed to diabetes, you're less predisposed to weight gain. So fiber is working not just when we're eating it, but it's working long after we eat it. And that's through the microbes that turn it into butyrate, that turn it into gut hormones, that then impact the entire body, not just in the gut. All right, so I've been talking generically about fiber. And all fiber is not treated equally by our body. There's different types. We've categorized it loosely in soluble and insoluble, fermentable and non-fermentable, and other categories as well. When I think about fiber, I think when a lot of people think about fiber, they think, oh, bloating, wind. Gosh, doc, I don't know if I can handle fiber in my diet. And that may be very true for a lot of people, and very true for some specific types of fiber. These are the so-called FODMAPs. And it's a bit of a mouthful. You want to go through it with me? Fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, see, I have to look and cheat. Monosaccharides and polyols. There you go. Those are FODMAPs. If anyone asks you in the future, you'll be able to tell them. There's one thing that you take away from this lecture, don't take that. So the FODMAPs, how are they different? Well, it turns out that if you have an imbalance in the microbes in your upper gut, whether it be small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, maybe some forms of irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, those fibers are pretty rapidly consumed. And when bacteria consume fiber, they make gas, so you feel bloated. It also means that you pull in a bunch of water from the rest of your body into the gut, so it creates diarrhea, loose stools. So folks that can't tolerate these FODMAPs for one reason or another, whether they have SIBO, IBS, or other things, truly will have symptoms if they increase certain types of fiber. So not all fiber is treated equally by the body. And this is just some data, some of the seminal data out of the university in Australia that first characterized these fibers, Monash University. But not all foods are high in FODMAP fibers. There's other types of fibers that, regardless of whether you have IBS or SIBO, tend to be handled quite well by the body, especially if you start low and go slow and you ramp up. These are the so-called low FODMAP fibers. And you'll see just a list here of some of the foods that fall into the high FODMAP and the low FODMAP category. Don't strain your eyes, just know that there's these two categories. You can always look up on the internet afterwards. Or better yet, talk with a healthcare provider if you have symptoms to try to sort out which of these FODMAPs might be contributing more to your gut intolerance of fibers. And then this breaks it down into the specific types of fibers that are present. And one of the biggest culprits, not the only one, FODMAPs, are fructans, fructooligosaccharides, FOS. On processed food labels, you'll see it as inulin, chicory root, garlic powder, onion powder. These are bad news for people that have intolerance to FODMAPs. A lot of people don't realize that. So looking at the label closely, if you have these intolerances for these types of hidden fibers, it can be really helpful. Similarly, there are low FODMAP fibers, and you'll see things like Metamucil and some of these other fibers up there as well. All right, so let's look at some more interventional data. What if we look at some specific fibers? This is a particular study. I looked at oat beta-glucan and resistant starch. These are two different low FODMAP fibers, and found that if folks consumed these two fibers along with the highest glycemic index foods that you could think of, so bagel and apple juice, Rice Krispies and rice milk, biscuit, a muffin. If you consume the fiber with them, it actually leads to a lower postprandial blood glucose curve, and it decreases it by about 30 to 40%. This is an aggregate of, I think, 6 different meals in 5 different individuals that are healthy. These aren't folks that have diabetes. But you'll see that consuming fiber with these really high glycemic index foods actually mitigates the effect of those high glycemic index foods, decreases how much that sugar spikes, decreases how much the insulin responds. And that's all a mechanism of that upper gut mechanism. Now, this is another study. This is a randomized placebo-controlled trial, and it's looking at a very similar fiber blend, beta-glucan and resistant starch, but in the context of a nutritional formula. It has protein and fat, and it compared it to another nutritional formula that was as similar to the first one, just missing those fibers, missing the active ingredients, the so-called placebo. And then compared yet to another arm that was just usual dietary advice. Like if you went to the physician, oh, you're good at this website, there's some good advice here for you on how to eat well. And that was provided across all the arms. This was an intervention for 3 months, and it was in individuals that had diabetes and that were either overweight or obese. And the primary endpoint was actually looking at a quality of life measure in diabetes. It's very well validated, and I'll show that to you in just a minute. But we're also very interested in hard metabolic outcomes like hemoglobin A1C and blood pressure, etc. Also very interested in mechanism. So how does the microbiome respond? How do the gut hormones respond? The GLP-1, the Wegovy natural gut hormones. This is the primary endpoint. It's a conglomerate of 8 different questions, essentially asking, how much does your diabetes bother you before and after the 3-month intervention? And the 3 different arms. So the green was the active arm. That was the arm that had the shake that had the fiber in it. The blue was the placebo arm. And then the red was just the dietary advice. And you'll see almost categorically that the green shifts to the left. And that's good. And when you average all that together, the composite score moved in a significantly positive direction, a p-value of less than 0.05. So it was a positive study. Quality of life improved with these fibers. These are some of the hard metabolic outcomes: hemoglobin A1C, weight, and then blood pressure. And these also either move significantly or trended towards positive improvement. There was one other measure of quality of life. It's the WHO-5, just 5 other questions, not specifically around diabetes, but general quality of life. That was significantly improved. There was also just some general questions, sort of head to toe: how's your sleep? How's your mood? And then lastly, the GI symptoms. And unlike a FODMAP intervention, all these GI symptoms actually trended towards improvement as opposed to worsening. These are low FODMAP fibers. And this is what happened with the microbiome. Don't worry about reading all these names. They get pretty crazy and fun sounding. But do take home that the microbes moved in the right direction. And the ones that eat the fiber went up, and the ones that eat what the fiber bugs then create out the other end also went up to the secondary degraders. So primary degraders, secondary degraders, and they make these metabolites: acetate, butyrate, propionate. These are just generally good things. All right, so at the very beginning, I talked about, well, which levers can disproportionately improve things. If we had to choose one, I said, well, let's focus on molecules, let's focus on fiber. I didn't talk so much about the other end, the microbes, apart from if you feed them, they will come. So I don't know if anyone remembers, it was the 80s or 90s, Kevin Costner, The Field of Dreams. Microbes are kind of like that too. Now, it's not true for everyone's gut, but it's true at a population level. If you increase fiber in a population, all those good gut bugs will come back. Even in individuals, they're just in low amounts, they'll resurface generally. Question is, well, what happens if they don't? What if I'm the type of person that has such a devastated microbiome? Imagine a bleached coral reef. What if it just doesn't have that ability to repopulate? And that's true. Some people have that. And there's, intergenerational conditions, which aren't just due to genetics that might contribute a little bit. There's something called epigenetics, which are kind of like genetics that turn on and off just in a generation. And then microbiome, right, can truly be transferred from mother to child. And you just may have been unlucky and not gotten a full microbiome from your mother. Similarly, you may have gone through life events, whether it's birth or other events, multiple courses of antibiotics as a child, or having ultra-processed diet your whole life, or other things. These two can devastate the gut microbiome, and increasing fiber in some people that have guts that are devastated, it's not going to lead to improvement. It can actually worsen things. So if you notice, I'm eating lots of fiber and things are not going well, it's a good time to think about talking to your healthcare provider and figuring out what's going on. All right, so here we go. Molecules and microbes together, they're really a happy pair. They really synergize well with each other, and sometimes both can be out of whack, sometimes just one. So let's talk a little bit more about those microbes. And I was talking at the beginning of the lecture with a few folks, and probiotics seem to be on everyone's mind. Should I take them? Should I not? Are these good? And it's always a tricky thing to answer, because the answer is, well, it depends. It depends on the probiotic and depends on the condition that you have. And there's some conditions, and some probiotics have been studied really well and have been shown to work. But generally speaking, when folks ask, should I take a probiotic? I just heard they're a good thing. My answer is, maybe save your pocketbook. They're probably not going to hurt, but they may not help. And if you're going to choose something, just go for fermented foods, because fermented foods have all of those probiotics. Most of the probiotics that are on the shelf, not all of them, but a lot of them are isolated from fermented foods. And it's just a single bug or, handful of bugs, 12 maybe if you're lucky. Whereas a fermented food has that full complement, especially artisanal ones, of the microbes. Not to mention, it has the things that those microbes like to eat, the so-called prebiotics, the fibers, and the postbiotics, the things that they create out the other end. So it's a full package when you have a fermented food. And that's usually my advice when people ask, should I take a probiotic? Now, there's this other class of bacterial therapeutics, and these are the microbes that are derived from the microbes that are in our microbiome. Very, very different from probiotics. Very difficult to grow. Very difficult to keep alive on a shelf. And massive efforts going into how we grow them, how we deliver them in a therapeutic capacity. And companies that you'll see up there that are working on that problem for things like Clostridium difficile, diarrhea, for inflammatory bowel disease. These are being used therapeutically. All right. So what does the data show around probiotics versus prebiotics versus, I'll introduce another term, synbiotics, which are the probiotics and prebiotics together. And you'll see FMT on the bottom, which is fecal transplantation, and then metabolites right above it. And any of these diamonds that move to the left of the line, that's a good thing. And most categorically, and the others generally move in a positive direction as well, but most categorically, it's the symbiotics that are moving things in the right direction. It's the prebiotic and the probiotic together. And so we're back to fermented foods. It's nature's symbiotic. These looks like cauliflower, doesn't it? No, so these are kefir grains. So one way of making a type of yogurt that's like a lassi or a drinkable yogurt. Kefir, yep. Those are the grains that you seed the milk with in order to transform it into a kefir.
And what's on the left?
These are just different fermented vegetables, sauerkrauts and such. Yeah.
I didn't know that cheese was fermented.
A lot of things we don't recognize. Coffee is fermented. Chocolate is fermented. Yeah. There you go. I should have put those on the slide. All right, so we're back to this slide, this inflection point, 1975. What happened then? Jeez. Well, one of the big things that happened is legislation allowed fructose as a sugar substitute. Processed foods really took off in a big way. There were processed foods before, ultra-processed foods before. But this is when high fructose corn syrup really started making it into our diet. And you'll see here that I've got both the missing things and the things that are too much in that sort of ratio. That's actually probably really important. Back to this question, what is it about ultra-processed foods that make them less healthy for us? And the question is, well, what is our future? Are we going to keep on this trajectory? Maybe it'll asymptote at some point, hopefully. Or can we somehow cause the reverse inflection? And could it be not as simple? It's a lot more complex. But could a really important part of that solution be bringing these key things that we've taken out back in, things that have been processed out back in, the fibers, other things? So how do we do that? Well, whole foods. And maybe new technologies to help us with whole foods, like delivery programs where you get, vegetables and ingredients at home and you make the food. Or maybe apps that help you keep track of the good foods that you're eating, things like that. But then also as a pragmatist, these next generation functional foods, I think, probably have a role here. It's the lesser of two evils. All right, so before the lecture, I was talking with another person about how incredibly difficult it is to go into a grocery store, even go down the cereal aisle and pick up a box of cereal and know, is this a healthy box or an unhealthy box? It's like reading a foreign language for most of us looking at a nutrition label. So is there a way that we can make this simpler, I guess, is the question. And this is a pet interest of mine around these ratios. So again, not about making out carbs are bad or certain types of fats are bad, sodium is bad. Maybe we have too much of it, but we also are missing the good things that truly help balance. And there are these evolutionarily honed ratios that exist within whole foods of these components, of carbohydrate to fiber, sodium to potassium, and of certain types of fats to other types of fats. Not only that, but there are interventional studies that show if you re-achieve balance, if you give, say, in a population that has high blood pressure, not just bring down the sodium, but bring up the potassium through supplementation, that actually works even better than bringing down the sodium alone. And the data that I showed around bringing up fiber, not just bringing down the carbs, not just a keto diet, which is all the rage right now, that actually has impact. And we're probably missing the boat when we just bring down the carbs and don't bring up the fiber. So what if we embrace this idea of ratios? Like, what if this can be an approximation for what it is about whole foods that makes them healthy? Remember, it's not just the good, not just the bad, maybe not just the hyperpalatability or the food structure, but these golden ratios. This is just another bit of data, and it shows how if you look at these ratios, it actually parses out whole foods and processed foods into these really nice, distinct, not completely distinct, but pretty distinct curves. It's the brown versus the red. All right. So back to this idea, what if we could make nutrition labels easier? Well, there's a lot of really good information out there. What if we just thought about those ingredients and turned them into ratios? And then turn that through an algorithm into a score. What if that score was just on a scale from 0 to 100, kind of like back in school? And a passing grade would be 70, really good grade would be 80, stellar if you're, in the 90s. And this is one of the things I've been noodling on. I've been working out this score that tries to do that. And even turned it into a little app that provides an overall number. You can just scan something in the grocery store, UPC label. It will use this algorithm and then give you a score for that specific food, whether it's processed or unprocessed. Generally, the unprocessed ones give you really good scores. Just a hint. The other thing it can do is give you suggestions around what might be healthier. So you scan one box of cereal and it's like, oh no, you should have this one instead. And oh, by the way, it's even here at this grocery store because we know exactly where you are. And a calendar so you can kind of keep track of the foods that you're eating, maybe the times that you're eating them. You're not snacking in between meals, which probably is contributing to metabolic disease. And giving that really important time between when you finish your dinner and when you have your breakfast in the morning. And then lastly, this ability to personalize. So we recognize everyone's gut is not the same. We all have different microbes, maybe even different genetics. And so some of us truly can't tolerate certain things. Some of us prefer a keto diet. Some of us prefer a vegetarian or a vegan diet. What if we could personalize it? Just check a box, and then it will give you advice that's specific to that dietary preference. Or perhaps you need to avoid things, right? Whether it be gluten, because you're sensitive to gluten, dairy. If you could personalize that advice, that would be pretty neat. And this app is working towards that. But we'll look back on smartphone apps like that in another 2, 3, 5, 10 years, and it'll truly be like the Stone Ages, because in the future there's going to be this massive personalization approach to nutrition with all these different inputs. So you'll have your microbiome sequence, your genetic sequence, your specific diet logged, how much exercise you do, and it'll give you a really tailored bit of advice on what you should be eating, what additional exercise you should be doing, how you should be mindful, sleep, etc. Oh, and we're back to the 4Ms. Now they're all being hugged in the McAfee family. But we haven't really talked so much about the movement and the mind. We did talk about the nutrition, functional nutrition, whole foods, functional foods, 70-30 rule, pragmatism. We talked about these new technologies that can actually maybe make our food choices easier. Some of the companies are working on that. And then one of the last things that we haven't talked so much about is this real-time feedback. There are these wearable devices, continuous glucose monitors. Probably over 50% of us have smartwatches that are continually monitoring different health metrics. How many steps we take, what's our heart rate, beats per minute, etc. These will become more and more sophisticated. You might even ultimately be able to measure blood glucose without having to have a fine thread or needle in your skin. Apple Watch is working on this technology. These will become more and more commonplace, and they'll allow us to personalize our approach to nutrition and health. And you can see some of the players up there. You probably recognize a number of those names. All right, so these are all the new technologies that might usher in the future of metabolic health. And these are the pathways to the future. So the idea is, if you can have early adopters embrace these technologies, change their buying behavior, those are signals then to companies. People are willing to make changes here, and we're willing to put out a premium product that will accommodate those changes. And then similar to the Teslas will become Volkswagens. Anyway, they'll become the future affordable cars. That's what I'm trying to say. The Hondas, and I don't want to, all cars are good. And then there's also this pathway within the healthcare realm. The first pathway is more about prevention, public health, but there's a pathway, folks have disease and how you treat that disease, how insurance companies not only will be willing in the future to pay for medication, but will be willing to pay for a food prescription or an app prescription, because the data has shown, A, it's impactful, and B, it can save them money. These are conversations that are happening currently at the level of the White House and different organizations post that meeting, and then the future. So we're back to tubes. We have the small tube, the undernourished tube, the big tube, the obese tube, and the future tube. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
We've got some mics that are going to be coming around. If you have any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there a test that we should run for doctors to test our microbiome?
If you want to see data just for kicks and giggles, because it's interesting to you, yes, the sophistication of our ability to interpret at this point, though, is not as sophisticated as our ability to actually measure. There are exceptions to that. One of the exceptions is around diabetes, and there's 2 companies that will send you a kit. You'll send in your stool, And then they'll give you tailored advice on how to eat foods that will keep your blood sugar down specifically. But beyond that sort of high level advice around blood sugar, it's more at this point, I think, fun if that's the type of thing that's interesting to you.
Perfect. Could we invite folks with questions to line up here on this side and then line up on the first row on that side?
Hi. My son has had a leaky gut, allergies and eczema his whole life. And we don't really know what to do about it because all of the allergies, there's a lot of foods he can't eat and the foods that he really concentrates on. What would be the next step for him in terms of what kind of doctor to go to understand the nutritional part and how to bring down that inflammatory system that he's dealing with?
Yeah. So we use this term leaky gut. It's an imperfect term.
Yes, sir.
There's, other terms that we tend to use in sort of the medical literature, which is more around barrier integrity. And it's not just how those cells come together, but the mucus that they produce and the antimicrobial peptides that go in that mucus. So barrier is a very real thing. It can be compromised. Leaky gut is one way that we describe that. When the barrier is compromised, yes, you can have potentiation of the immune system. But your question, what to do about it, it's a tricky thing. I mean, in consultation, I could give you an answer.
Yeah.
Up at the podium, it's more difficult.
He lives in Seattle, so maybe he could get in touch with you.
Yeah, but thanks for your question.
Yes, thank you.
No.
Question over here.
Hi, thank you. This was wonderful. I'm wondering what you think of the reliability of the body mass index. Is that the only standard? Is there an emerging standard? Just how do you feel about that in general?
BMI or body mass index right now is less in vogue than it was historically. And people are well aware of the imperfections in it. And that is because people have different stature regardless of the fat that's present in their body. For example, muscle can be super heavy. And so you can be heavy just because you're muscular. So it's a really good question. Now, there are other so-called anthropometric measures besides BMI. And one of them you saw in the lecture, which is waist circumference. There's upper arm circumference that tends to be used in pediatrics. And there's more too. There's very sophisticated measures of doing an MRI and looking at the amount of fat that's present relative to lean body mass. Any measure is going to have both its strengths and its weaknesses. And that's true for everything that I just mentioned. And when you are picking an anthropometric measure, you just have to be aware of that. And it's helpful to use, if you're doing a study, several different ones together to see how they cooperate with each other. I wouldn't say BMI should not be used. It's incredibly helpful and useful. If you go on TikTok, you might hear just the opposite. But it still has utility. It's just important to know its limitations as well and use it with other measures too. It's a really good question.
Hi, thank you. So if this is a trigger, you don't have to answer it. But because it's so out there on the internet now, I wanted to hear you speak to fasting and whether that's truly a good thing for weight loss or for certain people, or are we just cutting out snacks? Okay.
Yeah, fasting is a grab bag for lots of different types of intervention, different types of intermittent fasting. And they're all essentially moving in the direction of regulating when we eat and making sure it's not one big continuum. And it turns out that it's not just sunlight that regulates the natural rhythms in our body of when we're awake and when we're sleepy, of when we're metabolizing and digesting, and when our stomach and our metabolism is resting. Those are the circadian rhythms. And so it's really important to eat in a punctuated way because it entrains those circadian rhythms, not to have one big continuum. Fasting helps us with that. It kind of, you eat at a certain time in the morning, or in the afternoon, or, waiting an entire day. It helps reset that circadian rhythm. So I think all the different types of fasting are getting at that same basic metabolic reset. There's also probably, less calories generally that are consumed when you're fasting, and that's probably contributing too. But I think the circadian rhythm reset is a really important part of that, and why they're working. And there's good data to support fasting. Also, I'm a big believer in wisdom tradition, and there's plenty of cultures throughout time that embrace fasting. There's probably a reason for that.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. I'm interested to see what you think about, or what we can do about, the other factors that impact our patients' health beyond the individual lab work and results that we get. In other words, the societal and cultural and economic forces. And you talk about governmental regulation. How about the people that don't have a grocery store that has any fresh foods near them, and all they have access to is the shiny foods? I remember standing in a grocery store line and looking sort of pejoratively at the cart ahead of me, but the woman who had the cart ahead of me also had 3 kids hanging on. And how is she going to have the time, especially if she is working, to make a nutritious meal out of something that's a whole food? So how can we address that?
Yeah, excellent questions. Food deserts are real, even in inner cities, where it's not that you don't have access to food, but you don't have access to nutritious, quality food. And that very first slide, which had government and business, et cetera, I spoke to the levers that disproportionately can impact, but truly it's all important. And efforts are happening within each of those channels actively as well. So, WIC program and work to address food deserts. Now, the issue of time, I think, is another really important issue that you bring up. And, if you're a super busy mom or dad and you've got 3 kids hanging off of your grocery cart, how in the world are you ever going to have time to look at a nutrition label and know this is a better food, that's not so good? And that's maybe where some of these really easy, technologies where you just kind of scan something quickly and it gives you a number. And maybe you only need to do that once, and then investing that little bit of time could make a difference. I also think you raise the issue of Whole Foods. Whole Foods takes more time to prepare. There's the issue of cost too. Whole Foods tend to be more expensive, but not categorically speaking. Can of beans, oatmeal, all these are really, really healthy foods and yet are affordable. So education, I think, will help with the cost piece. This is where I become a pragmatist. If we can put some of these healthy things back into processed foods, into the shiny foods, to make them incrementally better, that will be a win. Good question.
Thank you for your efforts.
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm curious. It seems that over the past decade or two, our society has become more sensitive, gluten sensitive, lactose intolerant. Why is that? Why do you think that? Is it because they're just more consumption of those? Or is it that we're more aware? Or was it back in the day we just didn't address it?
Great question. The answer is we're not certain. I can give you some hypotheses. There's really interesting study that was done out of Israel with peanuts in mothers with young children. I think even maybe starting in utero. and found that the group that consumed peanuts versus the group that didn't consume peanuts was less likely to have a peanut allergy. And so we're kind of caught in this chicken and the egg phenomena. Which came first? Is it the sensitivity or is it the avoidance? That's one hypothesis, and there's some data to support that. The other hypothesis is that maybe there's things that are added to our foods that potentiate our responses, immune responses, maybe break down the barrier. Certain emulsifiers have been associated with a breakdown of barrier, which are the things that you add to oil and water to bring them together, like Skippy peanut butter, versus the natural stuff that is kind of a pain to mix. And maybe things like fiber and polyphenols too that are taken out, and fiber is converted to butyrate. Butyrate is one of the gut's favorite foods, certainly the colon cells, but probably circulates through the upper gut as well, gets absorbed in the liver and then put out through the bile. And these probably, promote a healthy barrier. And in the absence of them, that barrier is compromised and more likely to develop an immune response to the food. These are hypotheses, though.
I've always kind of wondered what else have they put into our food?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mine might be a rhetorical question. You touched on it just briefly with the other individual who was up here. But you talk about early adopters of wearable technologies and genetic matching to nutrition. What about education? Because not everybody can afford those technologies, but everybody goes to public school.
Well, I didn't mention another pet project of mine, but I wrote a children's series.
Yes, that's what we need. Thank you.
There's some publishers about it. Nothing that's signed yet. If folks know publishers, very open to introductions.
Self-publish it, throw it on Amazon, get it out there.
Yeah. That's not the only thing. We need healthy lifestyle education within our public schools. And Michelle Obama did some wonderful things around nutrition, and it was a great step forward. But if we can keep that momentum going, and it's not just nutrition, it's moving our bodies. I've heard of some school curriculums where they listen to music and have quiet time. It's meditation by a different name. These can be truly impactful. And if you can make a difference at that point, it carries through for a lifetime and through generations. So early intervention is the name of the game. And thank you for raising that question. Yep.
So I'm looking for an action step takeaway. What would be your ideal break fast meal? And what is your favorite fermented food?
My personal ideal breakfast food, not the ideal breakfast food. I like oatmeal. Oatmeal is a great food. It's got resistant starch, it's got beta-glucan, and is a wonderful stimulator of butyrate if you have the right microbes in your gut. You can add almost anything to it. Seeds, berries, dark chocolate, cocoa powder. Yeah, gummy bears, sure, why not? What was your other question? Let's see. Variety is the spice of life. How's that? Trader Joe's has a pretty good kefir that I like. Their mango and their strawberry. Though I don't know why only one is associated with high fat and one is associated with low fat. Haven't figured that one out yet. Yep.
This goes back to your slide that had the 4 parts of a community, and it's a political question. I'm disappointed in our government in some ways of how they, there's very little oversight in what we commonly call junk food. And another issue unrelated to this is the packaging that big companies use. Without having government step more on us, what could you suggest that the government can do? Public education. I know I have a grandson that's 4 in a preschool. They're learning about good and bad food choices. And so many of our young people nowadays don't know how to cook. They haven't been taught how to cook. One idea that I had was, if you're on government subsidies to help supply you with food, something has to go beyond that, just besides giving money out. How about free cooking classes on what you can use? And these are things that I think the government needs to help us with.
And is it okay to be able to buy a Coke on the WIC program, for example, right? A lot of these programs exist as a function of big food lobby, so they're a step in the right direction. But there's also other interests at play, and that's selling products. I think one of the really powerful things about understanding better what it is about whole foods that makes them healthy is you can incrementally make the processed foods better. And so there's an alignment of incentive there. And I don't think it's the only solution moving forward, but I think that's part of it. Now, what can government do? I think embrace those alignments. I think one very small key intervention would be to make food labeling more interpretable and easy, simple point system. And this exists in Australia, it exists in Europe, but we don't really have something similar in the US. And if we could do something as simple as that, where you can just glance at a package, at the back of a package, don't even need to use an app to scan it. There's a point system there already. I think that could help a lot.
Something that would help in that also. I take agents at the grocery store because of allergies to nuts. I know you talked about the peanut allergy, but that app could highlight the common allergies.
Yeah.
It would be great too. I would buy that app.
Yeah. Well,
Kind of like the glycemic index.
so that little code there, if you scan that, that will bring you to the website and you can sign up to be a beta tester. It's not available just yet for download, but you can kind of see how it works. And I'm passionate enough about this that there's databases that you have to pay for in order to make the data available. And if I can just get this app in a more or less finished format out there, that's a win. At the foundation, we had this embrace of urgency, where you recognize, like, literally people are dying every day. As we're sipping our coffees in the morning, like, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around that, but it's true. So this sense of urgency permeates, even the app work I'm doing and trying to make that available to folks. So if folks want to be beta testers and give feedback, that'd be wonderful when it's ready.
Let me just interject, Chris. I think I know Second Harvest, the food bank here, has a cooking class, a demonstration kitchen, and they bring in people, and because you give people a head of kale, they don't know what to do with it, and so if you teach people how to cook with those whole foods, and I know they do that here locally. It's a really great program.
Thanks for coming tonight. Two-part question. Are you coming next weekend to run Bloom's Day here in Spokane? You are welcome to come. Really, the second part is carb loading before a big sport event effort. Does that make sense from a microbiome and a gut health standpoint, or is that an urban myth?
Yeah, really good question. And this is where personalized medicine or personalized nutrition is really important. If you're an athlete, carb loading is critical. It's real. There's good science behind it. Having very simple carbs through the duration of your high intensity exercise for maximum performance is also critical. Fiber gets in the way of that absorption and maximizing the blood glucose that's available for your muscles. It's very good science around this. The advice that I was giving is really for the general population, but not for the very specific case of athletes. And for that, there's plenty of literature, plenty of coaches that can give you really good advice there. But what I will say is once you're off the track or the path or what have you, all the advice that I gave applies again. Right? Make sure you get your fiber, whole foods, polyphenols, and not just simple carbs. Don't think that because you're an exerciser, you can outrun or outcompete a poor diet. It's not possible. There's important things in there that are missing if it's just simple carbs that you're consuming.
Very good. Thank you.
And I'd love to come to Bloomsday, by the way.
So I have a question about fiber. I'm wondering about patients that have things like Crohn's that are suggested to have low residue diets. What kind of fiber and all the kinds of fiber that you're talking about would you recommend?
Yeah. So not medical advice, but yeah. Generally speaking, inflammatory bowel disease, you're right with active inflammation in a flare. It's better to have a low residue diet. But once you're out of that active flare disease, there's less guidance on what a healthy diet is. And even some recent literature that supports, I think it's in ulcerative colitis specifically, that a Mediterranean, a high fiber diet is best. And the rules are similar. And there's studies too, they're not great studies looking at just giving butyrate, which is one of the end products of a high fiber diet, or measuring butyrate in the stool in folks that have higher butyrate that are during a remission in ulcerative colitis are more likely to stay in remission. So active disease is very different. It's actually maybe not dissimilar from exercise. You want a pretty simple low residue diet, but once you're under control, there's less advice there, and some advice that suggests high fiber diet may be good. Yeah, there are fiber supplements. Metamucil is a well-known one, but it's pretty sludgy, not highly palatable. But there's studies showing that it can help with IBS, and also maybe even help with weight and things. So that's one possibility. I consult for a company that makes other fibers, and generally speaking, I think resistant starch, beta-glucan, arabinoxylan are ones that are low FODMAP and tend to be really good supporters of butyrate production. And there's lots of different ways of getting that into your diet, whole foods and different companies that provide it.
Thank you for tonight. If tomorrow I woke up and I ate oatmeal with seeds and berries and Mediterranean diet and I followed the fiber, how quickly do we see change in the microbiome in a positive direction? And similarly, how quickly could we, not destroy it, but how quickly could we do damage?
Yeah, there's studies that have looked at dietary changes, and it depends on what sort of change you're talking about. If it's just a simple metabolic change, in other words, the genes are turned on to consume that fiber, it happens immediately. You may not see a big shift in the specific microbes, but that happens faster than we might realize too, in folks that have residual populations of those good bugs. So, days to week, you can see shifts. And the mantra of start low and go slow is to allow for your gut ecosystem to re-equilibrate. You can imagine if you have those primary degraders without the secondary degraders in place. I didn't show the gases, I just showed the short-chain fatty acids, the butyrate that's made, with the lactate and acetate that's made. But yeah, you'll be pretty gassy. That's the sign that it's working though. But going low and going slow will help mitigate that. Your friends and family will thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming this evening. Your attention's been great, your questions have been great, and I just want to thank you for your support of our partnership here with Gonzaga University and the University of Washington School of Medicine. I want to thank our sponsors, Providence, MultiCare, Spokane County Medical Society, the County Health District, along with the UW Population Health. And I want to thank our speaker, Chris Damman, once again. And if you could give him another round of applause, that'd be awesome.
Most importantly, thanks for coming out and thanks for the really good questions.